He is the man, he is the myth, he is the legend, Mr. Peter Bracegirdle.
It's been another brilliant day, and this is the third one of these I've been to, and they are getting better, and they started pretty well, so it's all fabulous. I only have one complaint, which is I now have to follow Daryl, and one of the finest pieces of marketing history. So I feel slightly shafted, I'll be honest with you, by the running order, but we will give it a go, and hopefully enjoy it as we go. So I'm Pete Bracegirdle. I'm the co-founder of an independent ad agency called Creative Coalition. But most of my career, I've been kind of leading sort of regional and global teams for brands like Nissan and Mars and Twitter and PlayStation and Adidas and Nike. And a lot of the time in the UK, but quite a lot of time in New Zealand, and about 8-9 years in America. This is the third talk I've done at Building Brands. The first one was the story of Fearless Girl and what she teaches us about the value of fame. The second was the story of the relationship and the partnership between Adidas and the New Zealand All Blacks, and kind of what that teaches us about the value of being interesting. So I'm going to continue that theme, and today I'm going to talk to you about one commercial. It was an ad for Nike called Nike Park Life, and it kind of changed the course of Nike's reputation in the UK market, and it helped them conquer the football market. And it did so because it understood the value of truth. Okay? So that's the story today. It's really just one ad, but it's a whole lot of context and gubbins which I've put around it to fill the time. It's one of my favourite subjects, so you'll forgive me for the self-indulgence of talking about it. I'm going to play the ad, so we all know what we're talking about, and then I'll sort of run into the story.
Football, we get nothing but football, morning, noon and night.
Shut up. I'm an Eric boy. Confidence is a preference for the habitual voyeur of what is known as. A morning sleep can be avoided if you take a route straight through what is known as. John Scott Brewer's crew, he gets intimidated by the dirty pigeons. They love a bit of it. Who's that governor marching? You should cut down on your pork life, mate. Get some exercise. All the people, some radical people, love you. You're along with the boy. You're right. You've done the work. You've done that. Because you're right.
So we all recognise Nike now as, you know, the biggest, most powerful, best managed global sports brand with the best advertising, the strongest brand, and it has been for decades, frankly, in terms of the management of the brand. And now they're the leaders in football, right? So they sponsor all the best athletes, they sponsor all the best international teams and all the best club teams, and it would be easy, particularly for a lot of the young people in the room, to imagine that that's always been the case, right? So I'm going to take you back, if I may, to 1997, okay? Tony Blair, Britpop, lad culture, unkempt eyebrows. This was my heyday, frankly. Now, at the time, Nike was really just a basketball brand. It was an American basketball and football brand, okay? And its superpower was it kind of catapulted their elite athletes into this kind of iconic status, right? They could make superstars out of these athletes, right? But they really understood the game, right? They were really insightful about the sport and how their athletes got to these elite levels of performance. But here's the thing, football isn't basketball, right? And Nike were at this point in their global growth. They were dominant in America, and they were kind of sweeping across the world, if you like. But they recognised that if they were going to become the biggest sports brand in the world, they were going to have to conquer and win in the biggest sport in the world. So they had to figure out how to win in football. And they were investing, once Nike makes a decision like that, they go for it, right? So suddenly Nike was investing massively in teams, sponsorship teams of sponsoring players, buying up all the best players, buying up all the best teams, and investing heavily in advertising. That's how Nike does it, and they do it better than anyone else. So the year before our story, this was the ad that ran in the UK to promote football.
And on that day a dark warrior rose to the earth to destroy the beautiful game.
Maybe they're friendly.
Au revoir.
So, on the face of it, that's a brilliant ad. Entertaining, epic, aspirational. I mean, I love it. The stars are there. I mean, they spent a fortune. It shows. They were serious about this game. They were about, like, world domination, right? And it did all the things that Nike were absolutely brilliant at. It just elevated sport to, like, the highest echelons of entertainment, right? So the way that you've got to understand that at the time, over the kind of like the end of the 90s and through the end of the 80s and through the 90s, sport globally as a business went through this massive acceleration. Okay, so suddenly you had sort of the ESPNs and the Skies of this world, and suddenly sport, there's an enormous amount of money pumped into sport, and the players are getting paid fortunes. You've got brands like Nike who have the absolute genius ability with like Bo Jackson and Bo Knows, or with Michael Jordan, and then with football stars like this, they kind of elevated them to this sort of iconic status, okay? And so, on the face of it, this was Nike at its best. Wyden and Kennedy, the agency who did that ad in Portland, were then, and arguably are now, the greatest advertising agency of all time. You could say that Nike the best managed brand of all time, you could say that Wyden and Kennedy the best advertising agency of all time, and that was them at their best. However, all this kind of fancy stuff wasn't actually working in football in the UK. Now, the Nike brand was growing and popular, and everyone wants to buy their T-shirts and their trainers, but I'm not really buying into the fact that you've got any credibility, right? If you want me to buy your boots, I'm not sure. And the problem was that no one believed them. Like, it's entertaining, like I enjoyed it, and it's fun. I think Nike's cool, and they're kind of provocative. But but you haven't really demonstrated to me that you understand the game of football at all. Okay? I mean, that film, great as it is, isn't really football. I mean, it's not as I understand it. So, a brilliant ad in many ways, but not convincing, not persuasive, and not particularly effective at persuading people who play football in this country that Nike understood the game. And Nike's, I guess, central problem was that they were American. And back in the mid-90s, you'll remember, or won't remember, but I'll explain to you anyway for those people too young to remember, in 1994, the World Cup was in America, okay? So America was the biggest market in the world and the last market to embrace football. And so for FIFA, the American World Cup in America was the opportunity to kind of engage with the American sports market and persuade American sports fans to love football. And they were prepared to do almost anything to make that happen. And amazingly, in hindsight, they genuinely suggested that football should make the goals bigger. Like 25 centimetres higher, 50 centimetres wider, in time for that World Cup. And their argument was that the American audience were used to watching basketball and American football, and they're kind of like, there was lots of scores, like lots happened. And you couldn't really expect an American audience to sit through 90 minutes of a kind of a dreary 0-0 or a 1-0. There's not enough happening, there's not enough scoring. We need to make the goals bigger. Now, it seems remarkable in hindsight, that was a serious thing that FIFA were doing. I mean, they've made some catastrophic mistakes, but that arguably was their darkest hour. They also argued that maybe to help the TV audience and the TV companies in America, we should make it into 4 quarters, more ad breaks. It's like, are you kidding me? Now, of course, everybody outside of America, every football fan in the UK, and certainly here, were like laughing into their beers. They're like, what are you talking about? Like, the thing is, it completely reinforced what we already believed, which was Americans have absolutely no clue about football, apart from the fact they call it soccer. Americans clearly don't understand the game. Now, that's a problem if you're Nike, because if I don't believe that you understand the game, and you're American, you've got no heritage, frankly, you're just throwing loads of money at football, right, as far as I can tell, I'm not going to believe that you make good boots. So that basically was the equation. That was the marketing problem they had. And however enjoyable and entertaining Good versus Evil and the Devil and all that was as a commercial, it didn't do anything to make me believe that Nike understood the game. Now, so at this time, I'm a young account director, I say young, at Simons Palmer, which is a small advertising agency in London, and we had the Nike account locally. So Wyden Kennedy in Portland, they were the big main agency, but we were allowed to do the little things locally that they didn't really want to do or could do. So they did all the TV mostly and all that sort of stuff, but we did a few posters, pretty much. Some print ads and some posters. But, we did some pretty famous posters. So we did some pretty famous posters for rugby, we did some pretty famous posters for tennis, and we did some pretty famous posters for football. Now this one, for example, was the first one I did when I was working on the account. And you kind of think, okay, so I've got a cocky Frenchman standing, looking quite smug, in front of the English flag, referencing that date and that event in English football history, and making kind of that claim. So bold, provocative, certainly. But whether or not you liked Cantona or not, it was undeniably true. So you could not argue that he had not had an extraordinary impact on the game. He was the player in English football at the time. He was the best player, he was the most interesting player, he was the most entertaining player, he was the most talked about player. He had raised the standard of the game, and he certainly raised the interest of the game. So he had made English football better. Now this poster I mean, we had a national campaign, it's everywhere around the country, and he'd moved from Leeds to Man United, and Leeds fans hated Man United, right? And so every time we put a poster up anywhere near Leeds, they vandalised it. And so every time they vandalised it, we posted another one up. They vandalised it, we posted another one up. Now this kind of tit-for-tat battle between us and the Vandals became a news story. So the papers are covering this story. I got interviewed by the Daily Mirror. So we were arguing to Nike, going, you know what? We understand football. We get under the skin of football. We can connect with the English football playing country. So if you want to build credibility in football in this market, you need to get someone who understands the game to do it. And they said, you know what? Okay, they bought the argument, but they said, you know what? If we're going to let you do the TV brief, it better be good. Because if it's not good, it really isn't any reason to have a local agency at all, is there? So if it's not good, we'll just give the business to Wyden Kennedy. So this is a classic kind of be careful what you wish for moment. It was the most exciting brief you could possibly have, but also a massive amount of jeopardy and terrifying. So we start thinking about what is our point of view about football. And as I said, Sky had changed the way that football was televised. Right? So if you imagine BBC before Sky, okay, they haven't got very much money, they've got a couple of cameras, it's people wearing duffel jackets, it's not very glamorous, but it's kind of solid football coverage. Right? Sky, it's multiple cameras, it's hours of analysis, it's garish graphics, loud music. Like that, what they've done is they've kind of taken the American model of sport as entertainment and they brought it here. And it's kind of like garish and glamorous and dramatised and over the top, and we lap it up, right? And I guess our first thought was, you know what? I think football's beautiful enough. Like the truth of football is beautiful enough. And actually all this embellishment is not helping Nike, because that kind of good versus evil, let's just kind of dramatise everything, is not helping us. So maybe we need to strip away all of that embellishment and get back to just the truth about why football's beautiful. I was the account guy, but I was tasked with writing a brief, and I sat down to try and write a brief. Now, I'm absolutely an advocate of very, very, very brief briefs. Right, so absolutely reduce it down, be completely succinct, strip away everything, make your choices. Okay, so I absolutely believe that. And so I tried to do that for a number of weeks and really failed, right? Because I understood that the problem was credibility, and I understood that our job was to somehow demonstrate that Nike understood the game. We needed to not tell you anything, but we needed to make you feel like we got it, that we understood why you loved the game, that we understood what it was to play the game for you, that we weren't just buying our way into the elite level. And every time I tried to write that in like a kind of a proposition or a, you know, it just became so reduced, it was kind of platitude. It was just like sort of platitudes and stereotypes. It became this kind of like almost a kind of sort of newspaper headline or a commentary stereotypical line. And I couldn't find a way of writing it that had the kind of emotional resonance of someone who really, really loved the game, and this is what it meant to them. And maybe if I'd been a better strategist, I'd have been able to do it, but I ended up kind of like going, you know what, I'm just going to write. So I wrote, and I just poured out what I loved about the game, what I thought the country loved about the game, what it meant to us as a society, as an individual, all that stuff. Poured it out, 3 pages, and then just said, okay, and then gave it to the creator and go, this is it. We don't have to say anything, but you need to somehow turn that into a film. Now, the creative team, Guy Moore, who is now my partner at Creative Coalition, and his writer, Tony Malcolm. Now, Tony was a Fulham fan. He understood the game, so he already had a preconception of what football meant to him. Guy had no interest in football, didn't understand the game at all. And paradoxically, I think that helped, because he kind of had to go, you know what, I'm going to have to go and find out right? I need to kind of like seek the truth. He decided he was going to go. He saw an article about Hackney Marshes. I guess I'd conceded that I wasn't prepared to compromise on the truth about football for simplicity. So the brief, my justification for the brief, which everyone said that's not a brief, right? That's a long. I said, okay, so what was that? I was kind of like, well, look, you go and capture in one line why football's great. So that was the justification of the brief. So Guy's like, okay, I need to go and find this stimulus. And he read an article about Hackney Marshes. Well, if you don't know, Hackney Marshes is an amazing place. It's in the East End of London, and it's 120 football pitches. And it's like the mecca of Sunday League, right? So you go down there at the weekend, and there's literally, 120 games of football going on. And it's kind of all of God's creation. I mean, it is like every football from every level, and they're all playing it. And Guy went down there at the weekend with his camera, and he was completely blown away. Like, as an art director, he loved all these kind of pictures of pitches going down. But he also saw the game in its rawest state. Right? That's what football is for everybody else. Right? Not what you see on telly. This is what football is. So he takes all these pictures, and he's getting excited that this is an interesting place. And he goes to Snappy Snaps. This is before digital game. He goes to Snappy Snaps, gets them developed, gets back to his desk on a Monday morning, and he sits there and he lays them out on his desk, waiting for inspiration. And for whatever reason, he can't explain, he saw a picture of Eric Cantona on a copy of The Sun on the side of his desk, and he cut out the head. And then he took the head and he stuck him on one of his pictures. And he went, oh, hello, I might be onto something. Right? So he suddenly had to say, what if we got Eric Cantona and the other stars to play a game of Sunday League on Hackney Marshes? Would that be any good? And we started to sit down and talk about it, and the more we talked about it, the more we liked it. Because you kind of think about, like, footballers will tell you, they started playing because they love the game. The reason they play football is the same reason, the international football is the same reason they play, and what they love about it is exactly the same as the people who turn up on Hackney Marshes, right? And so whilst they're wildly different in talent, right, the Sunday Leaguers who, low on talent, beer bellies, hungover, they turn up and they love football just as much for all the same reasons. And actually, the distance between Hackney Marshes football and international football is not that great. Like, Ian Wright, who's one of Nike's stars at the time, started his career on Hackney Marshes. He was kind of discovered quite late in the East End. Like I say, he played a lot of football on Hackney Marshes, lots of pros had. So this idea of you kind of aspire to be, we all want to be Cantona, but we all have this shared love of the game. And so the more we thought about it, the more we liked this idea. So this line at the end of the commercial, whatever league you're in, was Nike's way of kind of saying, sort of our way of saying, look, we get it. Whatever league you're in, this is why we love the game. Whatever league you're in, we respect you. We're not just buying our way into the top. We're going to earn our spurs, earn the right by showing that we really get the grassroots. So, we started to feel like really good. We got a script we thought was interesting, we thought was right, we thought it'd be fabulous, right? And then everybody hated it. Like, it was soul destroying. There was only 3 people who thought there was any merit in it at all. Okay? And so the agency management went, guys, you've got this dream brief. We can go and do anything we like. Right? And you're doing something that feels quite mundane. You're just going to film people running around on a muddy pitch in the East End of London. Where's the glamour? Where's the au revoir moment? Where's the kind of Hollywood? Where's the razzmatazz? It's just kind of like people kicking a football around, probably most of them doing it pretty badly. And And everyone was going like, guys, this is not a Nike ad. That's not what we do. We do this kind of stuff. And so the client was like, doesn't feel very cool. And the agency's going, guys, missed opportunity. What are you doing? And we really believed in it, and we were persistent. And amazingly, they let us kind of keep going. So they started thinking about music. Music was going to be important. Now, this track, as a suggestion, came up really quickly. And anyone who works in this kind of like, anywhere near a creative department will understand this paranoia, right? Which is when you have an idea too quickly and it feels too obvious, you kind of go, well, that's perfect. And then you go, maybe it's too obvious. Maybe it's not surprising enough. Have we just gone for the easy, obvious answer? Maybe we need to keep going. So we very quickly got to this as a sort of, this is it, right? It just feels like that film. It feels like that world. It feels like that life. It feels perfect. But we kind of parked over here and went, well, let's keep looking. And you have to understand as well that now, then, and probably now, every band, every record company wants their track on the Nike ad, right? So every record company is sending CDs to Guy and saying, how about this? New band, about to break, new Chemical Brothers thing, all of this super cool stuff. Now, this track was 3 years old. Now, for Nike, that was ancient. Like, they're kind of going, we're much cooler than that. You've got an old track, which feels kind of like, why don't you go for something cooler? Now, the story goes, so Guy and Tony had selected a director. His name was Jonathan Glazer. Now, Jonathan Glazer now is a kind of like movie director, like Sexy Beast and stuff like that. Famous movie director, brilliant films. But at the time, he was doing music videos, right, for brands like Radiohead and stuff like that. So brilliantly talented guy, but he was not a big name yet. But he was a football fan, like he was an Arsenal fan, so he knew the game. And they met Jonathan in a pub. And they sat down, and Jonathan started sketching out how he'd do it, his thoughts on how he'd film it, and that sort of stuff. They're sitting down, talking about the script, and on the jukebox, Parklife comes on. So they're sitting there going, well, that's kind of spooky. Like, is this fate? And they sat there listening to the song, looking at the scripts, and kind of went, what are we doing? It's perfect, right? And they kind of decided, that's it. That's the song. So a fateful moment. But that's often how it happens. Lucky accidents, right? It just gave them the confidence. I don't know why. Sometimes things like that have to happen. But it wasn't done yet because the bit of music that they wanted was 52 seconds long, and the film was going to be 60 seconds long. So it's like, what do you do with that first 8 seconds? So Guy's like, this is like a significant problem, because if he can't figure out what to do with that 8 seconds, he can't really use the Parklife. So he struggles with this. So he sat at his desk. He's got football magazines piled up here, and he's got CDs with all the coolest stuff over here. And what he does is, he turns to the football magazines. And on one of the football magazines, there was a cassette, sellotape to the front, like a promotional copy of a tape. He takes it out, in desperation, frankly, he had no idea what's on it. He puts it in the tape machine, and on it goes, football, football, football. You get nothing but football, morning, noon, and night. Shut up. He goes, it takes seconds long. It feels like it's come from football. And I think, in hindsight, when I look at it, I go, you know what? Guy didn't realise it, but he was making a choice. He kind of go, I can either go cool and Nike and provocative and everything they want in this corner of the room, or I can go true and football and real in this side of the room. And he went looking for the answer over there, right? He went looking for the answer where the truth was, not where the fame and glory and fancy stuff is over there. So I think that's really important. And now, whilst it's a really strange and random creative choice, I mean, you couldn't think of that if it hadn't landed in the lab, right? You wouldn't write that in a script and then say, let's go and record it. I mean, it's completely random in many ways. But it kind of feels right because it's come from that world, because it feels true to the game. So, we finally get the script approved, we've got our music, we go and shoot the commercial. Now, it's a kind of an epic thing. It's 5 days. There is 120 pitches, but we've got 10 of them, which we decided were going to be in camera at any time. So 10 pitches, 20 teams, over 5 days. And we pair up the teams, and they're a mix of all sorts of different levels and stuff, and we paired them up and said, okay, when you hear the klaxon, start a game of football. Just play. Right? And when you hear the klaxon, you can stop and take a rest. And so whilst we were playing, we'd shoot our scene, and then whilst we're getting ready for the next one, they could rest, and they did it for 5 days. So they played a game of football for 5 days, basically. So all the football you see is pretty real, which is striking because you don't really see that anywhere else. The only football you see that's real is in a real match in a stadium. And if you think about it, whenever a brand tries to recreate football, they want to do it in a stadium, but there's no crowd, so it's always at night, and it's black, and it's all close up and stuff like that. Or it's good versus evil, and I'll say, look, we'll do an overhead kick and then do some fancy things. That's how football gets presented. And this was real football with real people who, a lot of them, weren't very good. Just an aside, the only window we had to shoot was the week after the end of the season. So they all played the last games, and then we had to get them down to London. So Robbie Fowler, who's a young Liverpool and England striker, bit of a lad, bit of a tearaway, and their game was at Sunderland, the last game of the season. We had to send a Nike guy to follow him around to make sure he got on the plane. So he was absolutely hammered when he was dragged out of a nightclub and poured onto a plane. And when he turned up, he was an absolute, shower, frankly. And you see him putting the boots on, and he looks like he's going to be sick, and he's pale, and he's sweaty, and it's just like, oh, really? Like, we've done this, and we just need you to do this one thing, and you turn up like this. Because he puts his boots on, and we say, we just need to pick up the ball, sort of run past a few people and pass to that guy. And then he's just like, boof. You just go, okay. Like, you realise then that these people are absolute magicians, right? Ian Wright turns up 9 o'clock in the morning the following day, Budweiser in his hand, still drunk from the night before. There's like 300 East End kids have bunked off school because they're kind of like they've heard something was going on. So they all skived off school and they mobbed him. So he literally gets out of his Addison Lee and says, walks 3 paces, gets mobbed by like 10 deep of all these East End kids who just idolised him. And he just put his hand up like this, like he does. He goes like this. And he just loved it. And the Nike client standing next to me go, hey, what are you doing? What are you doing? Security. And I'm like, she's petrified. Something terrible was going to happen to this incredibly valuable asset. And you're kind of like, oh, he seems fine. So all of this sort of stuff was happening. And the last thing I reflect on the shoot was the opening shot is an egg being dropped into a frying pan. Right? Now think about that for a moment. Right? Nike is an elite sports and fitness brand. Okay? And we're saying we think it's a great idea to have a fried breakfast just before you go and play football. And the client was like, we kind of hadn't really mentioned this in the pre-production. And we kind of just thought, had a little kind of room in the changing rooms. And we just kind of did it quietly. And she was coming in, she saw us doing it, she was like, and you could see, this is a typical moment, she didn't want to stop us because that'd be embarrassing in front of the director. And she was pretty clear, she was like, I think we're going to take it out and edit. Like, just let them shoot it, but we'll take it out. Because clearly, that's a really stupid idea. Like, no one's going to think I'm doing a good job of managing my brand by opening this massively important TV campaign with a fried egg. In what was a pretty grotty pan as well, by the way. And of course, what I think the team understood was, it's true, right? That is what, people go out on a Saturday night, they have a few beers, they wake up in the morning, and they go and have a greasy spoon, and they have a fried breakfast to try and sort themselves out, and then they go to Hackney Marshes and play a game of football. That's what we all do. And so everyone who watched that commercial, the first 5 seconds go, that's true, that's what we do. We'd immediately shown we understood their world, right? So, I'll play the commercial again, and then we'll reflect on what happened after that.
get nothing but football morning, noon and night.
Shut up.
I'm an boy. Confidence is a preference for the habitual voyeur of what is known as. A morning slip can be avoided if you take a route straight through what is known as. John Scott Brewer's crew, he gets intimidated by the dirty pigeons. They love a bit of it. Who's that cutting or marching? You should cut down on your pork life, mate. Get some exercise.
So the ad had a pretty dramatic impact straight away. So this is a couple of pages from the Sun immediately afterwards. They ran 3 pages, and then the next day they ran another couple of pages. Every newspaper was talking about it. It kind of captured the imagination. Lots of stuff, D&AD, which was interesting and quite satisfying, because actually, when we were talking about the script and going through the process, all of the creative people in London were aware we were doing this, right? And everyone thought we were screwing it up. Everyone thought, you've absolutely had a stinker, right? They're going, you got the best brief in London, and you're going to do that, right? And so it was quite satisfying when it kind of won everything and got recognised as being a good creative product. A few years later, it was voted by the kind of BBC poll of British people as the 12th best ad of the 20th century. But importantly, most importantly, before Parklife, Nike was a basketball brand. Pretty much overnight after Parklife, Nike became a credible football brand, right? And people kind of looked past the fact that they were American and Americans in the United States, because we'd earned our credibility. Vicky Maguire, by the way, is a lovely lady. She's a Chief Creative Officer of Havas. Anyway, she made that. She was asked what her favourite ad or the ad she wished she'd done or something. Anyway, so that was so great. And I guess the point is, we didn't have any credibility to start with, but by showing we understood the grassroots, that we understood the game, and we just showed all these details, and we revealed what football was like for them in its kind of unvarnished truth, without any glamour, without any dramatisation, without any embellishment, really, right? It kind of we earned our spurs, right? So we established our credentials in England. So from that point on, UK footballers believed that Nike football understood the game, and if I believe in your brand, I will trust your products. Okay? So, of course, brand strength, sales soared, and it was a massive success. So, what does it teach us? Comedians will tell you comedy comes from truth. Okay? It's funny because it's true. So you think about Peter Kay, who's brilliant, right? So he stands on stage and he gets out a tape recorder and he has that brilliant sketch where he does that kind of mishearing of lyrics, right? And everyone roars with laughter. It's hilarious. And everyone in the crowd's going, oh, God, it's so true. I do that. Do you do that? Yeah, you do that. We all do that. And so what Peter Kay's doing, it's funny because it's true, right? And suddenly, Peter Kay and his audience have got this shared thing. They're both sharing this experience of like, yeah, we're all the same. Well, that's the same for us. And that's great, that's funny. And so when you, as a brand, share your beliefs, I mean, obviously, the Dove example is arguably the example of this. But when you kind of say, this is what we believe, this is what we think, this is what we love, this is how we understand, this is what we understand to be true, and your audience can go, yeah, I think that, I feel that, that's what it's like for me, then you've built a connection. Then your brand has some affinity with them. They kind of go, that's the brand for me. That's my kind of brand. So you're building that brand affinity because you've kind of created that emotional connection. And I guess the second lesson, observation, and you could say, pretty obvious, but credibility and trust comes from truth. Well, kind of yes, but think about it. How many advertisers are like, what can we make them think? What can we make them believe? How can we disguise our weaknesses? How can we kind of like amplify and perhaps even exaggerate our strengths? And I've chosen this example. It's a very famous Think Small campaign for VW that was done by DDB, decades ago in the 60s or something, 50s and 60s, for VW. And what Birnbach did brilliantly was he told the truth, right? So the VW Beetle for the American market, right, was small for an American car, ugly, and it didn't look like anything else in the American car market. It looked weird, and it was really slow, right? So rather than trying to go, no, we're not ugly, we're not slow, he can like, no, we are a bit weird looking, and we're pretty slow, but you know what? We're reliable, and we won't let a lemon get out of the factory. And because they disarmed us with their honesty and truthfulness, and they've been transparent and honest, we believe them, right? I believe that VWs are reliable because you've kind of acknowledged that you're pretty ugly, right? So when you're thinking about trying to build credibility and trust, think about being honest and truthful and transparent and insightful. So not just accurate, right, but revealing the truth. Skoda did it years later in a similar way. So finally, I'd say when you're thinking about your brands and your communication, you're thinking about your campaigns, don't start with what you want to happen. Don't start with what you want them to believe necessarily, all that sort of stuff. Don't try and kind of embellish and enhance necessarily. Start with what's true. Right? Start with what's true about your brand. Start with what's true about your audience. Start with what's true about their relationship with the category, with your how they interact, what it means to them, what they care about. If you can start with what's true, it's the kind of best place to start. Thank you.